Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're getting into something that probably worries a lot of us. Retirement savings. You know that feeling? That maybe your nest egg isn't quite, well, big enough.
Yeah, it's a really common anxiety.
And the numbers, they kind of back that up. Our sources are showing that as of 2023, the median retirement account in the U.S. was sitting at only about $87,000.
$87,000. That's not a lot when you think long term.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially when you compare it to what the average American thinks they need. According to a Northwestern Mutual survey, that number is $1.26 million.
Wow. That's a huge gap, a really huge gap.
It really is. It just shows how challenging this whole retirement thing feels.
And look, for a lot of people, maybe most people, just saving more money.
Right.
It's just not realistic, right? Life's expensive. You pay the bills, you buy groceries, and there might be very little, if anything, left over.
Right. So you can't just magically conjure up more savings.
Precisely. So the focus has to shift. It becomes less about how much more you can save and more about getting better returns on the money you can put away, making your savings work harder for you.
That makes sense. It's a critical distinction. So, okay, that's our mission for this deep dive then. We're going to explore some specific growth stocks, the kind with, real staying power, companies you could potentially buy and hold for the long haul, decades even, aiming for solid returns without taking on crazy amounts of risk.
Sounds like a plan. Where do we start?
Okay, let's unpack this. First up, a company everyone knows, but maybe we don't always think about its future growth potential enough. Microsoft.
Microsoft.
Yeah.
A tech giant. You might think its biggest growth days are behind it.
You might, but they're still growing impressively for their size.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is their continued strength. We're talking nearly 14% revenue growth projected for fiscal 2025. That's substantial for a company that massive.
And a lot of that's coming from the cloud, right?
Absolutely. Driven heavily by Azure, their cloud computing business. It really shows how they've adapted and found new ways to, dominate.
And those cloud numbers are pretty eye-opening. I saw Synergy Research Group data saying Azure isn't just growing its market share.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually, and this is a direct quote, stealing most of it from market leader Amazon.
Wow. Stealing from Amazon, that's quite a statement.
Isn't it? And this whole cloud market, it's booming. Straits Research forecasts it to grow at almost 19% annually. That's huge potential.
Definitely. And that's just the cloud.
Right. Let's not forget their other strongholds. They still control, about half the personal productivity software market, Office and all that.
Still dominant there.
And Windows. StatCounter says Windows is still on roughly 70% of all laptops and desktops. That's just incredible staying power.
Which brings us to this idea of stickiness.
Explain that a bit.
Well, it's not just about having a lot of customers. It's about how integrated Microsoft products become for businesses, for individuals.
Yeah.
Switching away from Windows or Office or Azure, once you're in that ecosystem, it's difficult. It's time-consuming. It can be expensive.
So people just stick with it.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It creates these really predictable kind of compounding revenue streams. That's gold for long-term retirement planning. And there's really no sign that fundamental stickiness is going away soon.
And what really stands out to me about Microsoft is how they've been willing to change things up, their business model evolution.
That's crucial, yeah.
Think about Microsoft Office. Word, Excel, PowerPoint. We used to buy that stuff, right? Pay once for a license per computer.
Right. You'd buy the box or the download.
Yeah. But now, it's mostly a cloud-based rental.
Right.
A subscription. You pay monthly or annually.
Like streaming music instead of buying CDs.
Exactly. And that shift generates these steady, recurring fees. That's a much more stable, predictable business for investors over the long term.
Wow.
How tough was that shift for them, you think?
Oh, I imagine it was a massive undertaking internally.
Yeah.
Culturally, technically. But it clearly paid off. It's like they reinvented themselves while staying true to their core. That's key to their longevity.
Okay, so Microsoft is the established giant that keeps evolving. Let's pivot now. Let's look at an industry that's maybe being disrupted even more fundamentally. Banking.
Yes. Banking. It's definitely shifting. Increasingly online, and maybe more specifically, onto our phones.
The data supports that, doesn't it?
It does. There was an American Bankers Association poll recently, found that 55%, over half of U.S. consumers, prefer using a mobile app for their banking.
55%, that's a majority.
Yeah, and another 22% prefer using a computer. So you add that up.
That's over 3/4 doing banking digitally.
Right. Compare that to, say, calling the bank, using an ATM, or actually going into a branch. All of those were less than 10% each.
Wow. So the branch visit is becoming pretty rare.
It really raises a big question. How are the traditional established banks keeping up with this massive shift in how people want to bank?
Well, one company that seems to be right in the middle of this wave and really benefiting is SoFi Technologies.
SoFi, yeah. They started out focused on student loan refinancing, right?
That's right. But they've really expanded, exploded, you could say.
Yeah.
Now they're a full-service digital bank.
Offering everything.
Pretty much. Checking accounts, savings, personal loans, credit cards, the works, all through an app.
And their growth trajectory has been something else.
Tell us about that.
Well, back in early 2020, they had less than 1.1 million customers. Fast forward to the end of Q1 2025, nearly 11 million.
Wow, that's tenfold growth in about 5 years.
It's huge. And maybe even more importantly, those customers aren't just signing up. They're using more and more of SoFi's different services over time, adding products.
So they're getting stickier, too, in a way.
Exactly. And what this really shows, I think, is this deeper shift. It's about changing consumer trust, especially among younger generations. They seem much more comfortable using these newer digital-first providers. They like the self-service aspect.
It feels like a real paradigm shift.
I think it is.
Yeah,
It's probably going to continue. SoFi seems really well positioned for how the next generation will manage their money, including for, long-term goals like retirement.
Okay, so we've had the evolving giant, the digital disruptor. What's our final idea? You said it's a bit different.
Yeah, our third pick is Berkshire Hathaway. And I'll admit up front, it's kind of a cheat.
A cheat? How so?
Well, you're not picking a specific company based on its widgets or services. You're essentially deciding to let Warren Buffett and his team, his lieutenants, do the asset picking for you.
Outsourcing the decision-making to the Oracle of Omaha.
Kind of. Even though Buffett himself is actually stepping down from his role as chief and the main stock-picking wizard at the end of this year.
Okay, that's a big change. Does that make it riskier now?
Well, let's connect this to the bigger picture. It's about investing in a philosophy, a proven approach that has worked for decades.
So even with Buffett stepping back from the day-to-day stock picking, you think it's still a great lifetime holding?
I do, for a couple of key reasons. First, that market-beating investment approach. It's not just Buffett. It's deeply embedded in the company's culture, its DNA.
So the philosophy lives on.
That's the idea. It's likely to guide Berkshire for decades to come. But, it's a valid point. Is the DNA enough without his specific genius?
We'll see, I guess. What's the second reason?
The second reason is that Berkshire is much more than just its stock portfolio. People focus on the stocks, the Apples, the Cokes, but those only account for about a third of Berkshire's total value.
Only a third. What's the rest?
Another third is just cash, a massive pile of cash, almost $300 billion currently.
$300 billion in cash.
Yeah. It gives them incredible flexibility and optionality. They can pounce when opportunities arise.
Okay, stocks are a third, cash is a third. What's the final third?
That comes from the businesses Berkshire owns outright, wholly owned subsidiaries.
The private companies they bought.
Exactly. And they're often not, the most exciting businesses. But they're reliable cash cows. Think Geico Insurance, BNSF Railroad.
A huge railroad.
Dairy Queen.
Love Dairy Queen.
Acme Brick Company, Fruit of the Loom, Duracell Batteries. The list goes on. Solid, steady businesses churning out cash. It is kind of comforting, isn't it, knowing that Buffett and Munger historically vetted these things for you?
It's like a built-in diversification across different types of assets and industries.
Precisely. And this leads to Berkshire's sheer flexibility. That's a huge strategic advantage, especially for long-term investors. Think about most mutual funds. They usually have to stay fully invested, I see. And they typically stick to very specific types of stocks or bonds.
Yeah, they have mandates.
And they rarely own stakes in private companies. Berkshire doesn't have those constraints. They can shift between public stocks, buying whole private companies, or just sitting on that huge pile of cash if they don't see good value.
So they can adapt to whatever the market is doing.
That's the key. It provides this built-in resilience. If stocks are crazy expensive, they can wait. If a great private business comes up for sale, they can buy it. That adaptability is invaluable over a 30-plus year retirement horizon.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway here for someone listening trying to figure out their own retirement plan? So what does this all mean for you? It seems the core message is that hitting those retirement goals, especially given that big gap we talked about, isn't just about scraping together more savings. Maybe it can't be.
Right. That's often not the whole solution, or even possible.
Instead, it's about being smarter with the savings you do have. It's about intelligently growing that money through long-term investments, choosing companies or maybe strategies like Berkshire that are built to last, adapt, and hopefully keep generating strong returns without excessive risk.
Exactly. And maybe this raises an important question for you, the listener, to think about. Consider how the adaptability we saw in Microsoft, how the shifting consumer behavior that's boosting SoFi, and how that diversified, flexible strategy of Berkshire, how those things illustrate bigger principles
Principles of what?
of long-term financial resilience and growth. How are these broader economic shifts, these changes in how people behave and what businesses thrive, how might those influence your own financial thinking, your own planning for the future?
That's a great final thought. Looking beyond just the stock tickers to the underlying forces shaping long-term value, definitely something to ponder.